Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I see we have quite a few people joined us here, Mexico City and Argentina and Honduras. Thank you for joining us today for this NDSP 101 for liaison and coordinators, specifically in the Latin American region. We all know we have one of the best regions to work with, and we're excited to take this opportunity to give you a high-level overview of NDSP, as well as talk about some ways that we can work together and give you an opportunity to provide us feedback on ways that we can keep working together more often and make sure we keep our system running smoothly. This event will be recorded. We are going to take questions, and you can put your questions in the chat. At the end of the event, we will go through and answer those questions. Also, if you don't mind, in the chat, if you'll post your name, the country that you're in, and your role. So I know some of you are budget analysts, and some of you may be other office personnel, administrative personnel, or Army personnel. Please just post your name and your country and your role in the chat. At this time, your mics are muted. Just keep them muted unless you have a question that has to be asked right away, and then you can bring it up. But I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Show you who's online. So we have Lori Edom. She's our finance and program manager, and she's with Erica McCoy, our education policy program manager. And we have Kelly Lanier, our finance program analyst. I know everybody knows Kelly. Then we have me, the education specialist for the region, and we have Dr. Shanna Smalls. And so that's our team that's going to present to you today. And we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to Erica, and she's going to start talking about our program.
All right. Thank you, Kevin, for the pass off and for initiating this, actually. And thank you all for joining us today. So just to go ahead and get started, just quick high-level overview about the Non-DoD Schools program. I'm sure most of you are very well aware of the fact, but I always like to just make sure that everyone knows this, that while our name would suggest otherwise, we are indeed a part of the DoD. And more specifically, we are a program of the Department of Defense Education Activity, also known as DoDEA. DoDEA has the authority in law, so this is a pretty significant thing for you to know, that this is not something that we just love to do, although we do love our jobs and we love to support you and our families in locations. But in law, DoDEA has the authority to provide an education allowance, and that's what gives us the ability to run the Non-DoD schools program. So that's a legal matter. And specifically, the law requires DoDEA to provide educational support in overseas locations where DoDEA schools do not operate, and where military members are allowed to bring dependents, obviously, and where those dependents are command sponsored and age. We'll get more into eligibility later, but that's the key thing to note. For your locations, the good news is that most of your locations are going to be supported by the Non-DoD schools program. Obviously, in other locations, like in Europe, we have some locations that are close enough to the DoDEA school where sometimes it becomes a question about where the line is drawn, so to speak, with Non-DoD schools program and the DoDEA operated schools. So just again, kind of big picture, we are here obviously speaking to you all for your location, but just so you have a little bit of perspective, if you have been other places around the world supported by us, or even if you haven't, good for you to know, just in general, we support between 4,000 and 4,500 students, depending on the time of year, annually in about 315 duty stations around the world. So pretty wide reaching, but as you all can attest, some of those locations, like some of yours, are large and support many U.S. government, DoD members, and some are very small and may only have one or two in exchange program assignments and other things like that. So we definitely run the gamut on the types of locations that we support, which is why we need you all to help us with doing our jobs and making sure that our families are well supported. So why we support you, it's in law, right? Where we support all over the world in locations where the DoDEA does not operate in overseas locations or the non-US territories as well. I should have made that clear. And then how? And that's what we're going to spend a lot of our time talking about, is the how, and getting into some of the weeds that really do matter. And we really want to make sure that you have a good understanding. But if you don't hear anything else, what we really want to make sure you know is how to contact us, who to go to for what, because that becomes really important. And Kevin will talk a lot about that a little bit later when we get into the collaboration and how we can make sure that we are supporting one another. But just to give you a little bit of just kind of hierarchical, how are we structured? And then we'll get into each of these areas as we go through the presentation. We have three main areas of program support: our eligibility and program management team. They do everything from eligibility to answering policy-related questions to helping with reviewing of orders and transfers and extensions and all kinds of things related to eligibility and policy-related questions. And I'll talk a little bit more specifically about the program management team's role in eligibility in just a moment. We have our education team. We'll talk, again, they're all things education, from special education to gifted education to supporting transitions and all things in between. Dr. Kevin O'Brien and Dr. Shanna Smalls are online, and they'll talk a lot more about their role and how we support you from an educational perspective later in our presentation. And then our resource management teams, led by Lori Edom and Kelly Lanier is on the line as well, and they'll talk more about the specifics around invoicing and reimbursements and all things financial later in the presentation as well. But that just gives you just in terms of three, like the main areas of program responsibility, how we support you in our different teams of support. So first things first, eligibility. Before we get into all the other things that really also matter, one thing that is obvious that we have to establish is eligibility. And our program management team is responsible for that, as previously mentioned. The program management team also handles other things related to policy oversight, really helping to work with our resource management team and with you on policy interpretations. That comes up quite a bit. We'll talk about that in our collaboration a little bit later, because there are times where you're wondering, like, what does this actually mean? And we refer to the DSSR, we refer to all these different things, and why do we do that? So our program management team helps to support you in that way, as well as supporting sponsors with the registration process, exceptions to policy, and for home study. We have a home study education plan that's required, and so those things, as well as overseas tours and extensions, are all supported by our program management team. So while we don't expect you to memorize these things, although there may be a quiz later, I don't know, it is important to know these things. And with eligibility, the good news is that you're obviously not responsible for determining this. That's the role that we play. But we really want to make sure that you have a decent understanding about who's eligible and why someone may or may not be. Again, your locations, in general, the one thing that we first have to identify is the location, right? Are company tours allowed, and is it a location that's overseas, and is there a DoDEA school in that vicinity? And for you all, those things are usually going to all be yes, yes, and yes. So then it becomes the sponsor, and are they actually, do they have a command sponsor dependent? And so we rely on a couple of sources to determine that. So in terms of just where we get this information, although we all think we're great and smart and experts, it really comes from law and policy. So we don't have to make these things up. We have a good standard to base our decisions upon. The first one comes out of law, which defines what a sponsor is, and it also further defines location. So sometimes we do get asked questions about some of the U.S. Virgin Islands, and if that would be allowable. And again, we have the law that gives us the answer to that. As it relates to command sponsorship, this is a very sticky wicket. I won't try to get into it here, but the DoDEA, the DoD 131518 defines what command sponsorship is. We have a lot of, interesting definitions out there, because each military component may have their own way of trying to define command sponsorship, but ultimately we refer back to the 131518 as our point of reference. And then last but not least, as we get into age requirements. So eligibility is based on location, it's based on command sponsorship of the dependent, and if they're eligible to be in that location with their sponsor, and do they meet our age requirement, which we'll talk about next. So as you probably know, and if you don't, then consider this your way of being informed, beginning a 24 school year for Southern Hemisphere, that would have been beginning January, February. And for those who are in a predominantly Northern Hemisphere location, that would be beginning in this upcoming August, September timeframe. We are beginning the expansion of our eligibility to pre-K. It's important to note that this expansion is only for DoD active duty or military members, meaning those who are supported by the NDSP. Many of you are co-located in locations where there is a Department of State embassy or consulate. This is not an extension of their eligibility. They are under a different fiscal authority in Title V, which specifically provisions their authority for age 5 at kindergarten. So I just want you all to be aware of that, because I do know that in a lot of your locations, you do have Department of State dependents, and that this is not going to be an extension of eligibility for them, only for our dependents. And some caveats to this that we think it's important for you to be aware of. One, if you're in another Northern Hemisphere location, the child must turn 4 by September 30th. The thing about this is that this does not supersede the school's requirement. So if the school has an earlier requirement for the child, like September 1st or September 5th or whatever, then the school's requirement will supersede. And I know sometimes that comes up quite a bit, where families feel, frustrated because they're like, I thought you said September 30, or I thought you said whatever date. We cannot supersede what the school requirements are. And so we just want to make sure that that is clear to you. And obviously, if questions come up, you can certainly send them our way so that we can help discern that. In the Southern Hemisphere locations, the child must be 3 years and 8 months by the beginning of the school year calendar of that particular school. So the Southern Hemisphere is a little harder for us to give kind of a blanket cutoff date, because we know that some schools start in January, some in February. But again, the same rule prevails. If they have defining age criteria that is different than what the NDSP requires for eligibility, we are determining eligibility for NDSP. We're not saying that the child will be eligible to attend the school, and those are two different things. So we want to make sure that's clear. Another thing that should be noted is that the actual eligibility of the institution, as you may know, and as we'll discuss shortly, parents do have choice in terms of what school they select. But when it comes to pre-K, there are some additional caveats, and the school that is selected must also offer a kindergarten and first grade program. So they cannot select a daycare center or early child care center that only has a pre-K program. They must look at institutions that also provide a kindergarten and first grade as well. So a couple of notes about registration. So the sponsor is able to register with us before they arrive to location. Obviously, the sooner they're able to do that, the better. It gives us a little bit more information about them so that we can support. But a couple of things that are required. The sponsor must have their PCS orders. We cannot accept requests for orders. We must have their PCS or web orders in order to determine their eligibility. For the entry point, which now is pre-K, used to be kindergarten, but now pre-K, we must have passport or birth certificate so that we can prove age eligibility. And based upon the child's needs, we also would need to have an individual education plan or IEP if they have a special education need, or their 504 plan. Or if they're choosing to home study, we do require a 2-part home study education plan as part of their ability to receive funding for home study. The sponsor does not have to know which school. And so I know sometimes, even though we request the school during the registration process, they are able to go through the process without actually selecting a school, although they do need to let us know which school they have selected prior to that school, prior to the child starting school. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Dr. Kevin O'Brien to take you through more about the education options and support.
Okay, thank you so much, Erica. So we talked about just a broad overview of our policy, how to get registered, and who's eligible. Now let's talk about your educational options and the support that's available once you're in the program. Basically, sponsors have 3 options for their kids. They can choose an at-post school, an away from post school, or they can choose a home study or virtual school. So if they choose an at-post school, there are different types of at-post school, as you all know, in each of your locations. Every one of our locations in this region has an assisted school, which is the one that's funded and works most closely with Department of State. That's the one that has ensures that it has an accredited curriculum, a Northern Hemisphere calendar. More than 50% of their instruction is in English, and that they meet specific accreditation standards set by Department of State. But a sponsor can choose any school at Post that they want to. They could choose a Montessori school or a British school, but the at Post assisted school is the one that works most closely with Department of State. Within the DSSR, oftentimes you'll see two different allowances for education, one being for at post and the other being for away from post. When the allowance for the away from post is greater than, that means that the site has been determined to be, quote, not adequate by Department of State for those grade levels. And parents may choose a boarding option. So oftentimes that looks like sometimes it's $50,000 or $60,000, $70,000 for boarding costs. For a boarding option in NDSP, we describe that as being full room and board and a full curriculum. So they can't go back to Miami and stay with grandma and go to a day school. They have to go back to a location somewhere in the world greater than 45 minutes from where they're currently assigned, and they have to be enrolled full-time with room and board, and the school must have a full curriculum. There are some schools out there that are more like sports schools. Those don't count because oftentimes they don't offer the full curriculum. There's primarily is their sport that they're focused on. So there's the at post, the away from post, and then there's home study. We've seen a huge increase in the number of home study families in our program since COVID. And also the number of home study and virtual school programs that are available globally has gone up as well. There's some really good programs out there that people are starting to take advantage of, particularly our military families, because they move so often, they can take their education with them wherever they go, and a lot of families really prefer that. As part of that home study registration, they do require a education plan, and there's two parts to that. We can work together with any family that's having a difficult time with choosing classes or whether or not they want to build their own program or enroll into a predetermined program that has an accredited curriculum, for example. So we maintain a website. So now we know what kinds of schools we can pick. We have a way to help assist people in researching schools, and that's through our website called ndspmap.com. It provides a listing of schools around the world that NDSP families have chosen. So it may not be an exhaustive list of all of the schools that are available in a location, but it is a list that we try to keep updated for any families that have attended in that specific location. And you can go to this site and type in your country and your city, see which schools come up. If there's a school that's not coming up that needs to be updated, you can send that to me and I'll make sure it gets to the right people to get it updated. Other ways, of course, to research schools are talk to members of the community, talk to schools, talk to you guys, talk to the NDSP liaisons. We know there's a lot of social media groups out there. There's a lot of WhatsApp chat groups out there for specific locations, and that's also a good way to find schools. Just keep in mind, NDSP doesn't approve or deny school choices, but it's up to the parents to do their due diligence and be able to pick the right school, ultimately to ensure continuity of education. In other words, if they are in Brazil for 1 year in grade 7, if they move the next year, they should be able to move on to grade 8 at their next location. That's the goal of choosing the school. Talking about me, I'm the education specialist. Each of our regions has an education specialist. Some regions have more than others. I'm responsible for everything Mexico South. So if you're in any of those locations, then I would be your education specialist. Some of the things that we do, our overall goal is to support families as they transition to and from NDSP sites, as well as while they're in an NDSP site. So to do that, we can authorize supplemental support, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We can provide consultation for home study. We can help families who have disabilities with Section 504 plans or special education and case management. And we also do education screening. So in a nutshell, that's the role of the education specialist that I take care of for our region. That pre-authorized academic support, I keep saying the word pre-authorized, and I know many of you hear me say that a lot of times. So anytime somebody wants to access some of the resources that I'm going to talk about, they do need to come to me first and get specific authorization for that. So a lot of times this authorized academic support looks like tutoring, And to be eligible for tutoring, a student must be failing or at risk of failing, or require the support to continue to progress through the course or to the next grade level. Sometimes schools will require that students have academic support to remain in the school, literally, or to be promoted to the next grade or to complete the grade. So, for example, in the Northern Hemisphere, we have summer school coming up. The only time we can approve summer school is if the student, not the only time, but in this specific case, when the student would not be promoted to the next grade level unless they had summer school. And that would be a way that we can provide the supplemental academic support. We can also use the academic support as a pre-referral for special education, what we call response to intervention. And so that comes into play a lot more when we start getting into special education. Also, when the child's first language is not English and they're attending a primarily English-speaking school, then they would automatically qualify for tutoring or academic support. On the flip side, when the family chooses a school that's primary language is not in English, assuming their primary language is English, then they would automatically qualify for pre-authorized academic support. And I say automatically qualify, they still have to request for an authorization from me to qualify for it. But when they're in a school that isn't speaking English, then they automatically qualify. Not only is it tutoring, it can be coursework, and this is a very popular topic in our region and around the world because most of our families are going to move from a U.S. public school or a Department of Defense school into an international school, and sometimes they'll do that 3 and 4 and 5 and 10 and 11 times in their career. And as kids progress into the later years, we start to realize that many states, for example, require you to have U.S. history to graduate. Well, U.S. history isn't taught in our international schools. So we can fund, with an authorization through me, them to take U.S. history, for example, on an online platform like BYU or University of Texas. Also, the coursework could be for things like gifted. It could be for advanced placement courses or just courses that aren't offered that they need to graduate. We've had an increase in dual enrollment, and many of you have been around the U.S. in the past few years. Dual enrollment is very popular, and we can approve it as long as their current school is accepting the credit. Then we could approve it for, it would also be a dual enrollment class, but the first key is that their current school is accepting it as a credit. As I talked a little bit about special education, all of our education specialists are special education approved, certified teachers, many assessors as well. And these students sometimes come to us with an identified disability, and we're able to maintain their individualized education plans or their Section 504 plans because we're a certified accredited agency through the Department of Defense, and we would be like their case manager for that. In addition to that, if they're in a location and they realize, hey, he's not developing at appropriate level, this would be something that we can help them through. And I find a lot of families out there that may even have had the child born in a location and then they realize when they're 2 years old they're still not talking, and they say, hey, is this normal? And they can be referred to me and I can help them through that. Even though our program doesn't start for special education until age 3, I can help set them up with a developmental interventionist that can help them from birth to 3, and then I can take over at 3. But the point is that even if they're concerned and they don't currently have a disability, we can help work them through that process of determining eligibility. We can, as an education specialist, I can literally come down and do assessments, but also since COVID, the ability for the online assessment agencies to conduct robust, accurate, valid assessment has increased drastically. So we have some really good companies that we work with that can do online assessments, and they also direct invoice NDSP. And there are some that don't, but there are some that will direct invoice us. So as far as the funding for it, which the fees for a full psychoeducation assessment are $3,500 to $5,000. We don't want families to put that out of pocket. We can fund that for them up front. So anytime you have a family that would come to you that has a special education concern, please forward their concern to me and know that NDSP can take care of these folks, and they shouldn't feel like they're out in a foreign location where they don't have any kind of support. And I'm going to pass this off to Dr. Shanna Small. She's going to talk a little bit about additional education supports called transition supports.
Thank you, Kevin. So what we are trying to do, we primarily provide support for secondary students or when curricular requirements are different. So we will consult with with the families, and we can also consult with the schools to help make that transition a little more seamless. And you may be aware that we're currently working on a transition support project because we're trying to get feedback from our families to see what goes well when they transition from duty station to duty station, that NDSP has helped them with, and what we can possibly do additionally to help ease that transition. And so we've hosted several events where we've spoken with families, and we have another one coming up next week, which some of you will be invited to as well. So we are doing that data collection so that we can always improve our program, because our program is only as good as the support that we provide, and we want to make certain that our families land the way that they're supposed to, and that the academic transitions for students are as seamless as possible. And when we're working with our families, we emphasize being proactive. And what that means is, as soon as they get information that they're going to be transitioning to a new duty station and they find out exactly where they're going, we tell them to connect both schools. So connect the sending school, the school that you're leaving, and then connect the school that's the receiving school, so that they can work out any intricacies that happen. Between countries, sometimes the curriculums vary. And so while you may have been on one particular graduation plan in one place, that may not be feasible in the next place. You may have to take those supplemental courses that Dr. O'Brien spoke about, or you may have to do other things, but it's best to know ahead of time what what any differences are, so that you can work through them prior to arriving. So when students arrive, they can just hit the ground running and they don't have to worry about anything. So understanding those differences, they'll help you understand the differences between the school curriculums and the country to country course equivalencies and the new graduation requirements. And if you look at the screen, we say, is a professional transcript evaluation needed? That is something that education allowances do provide for, provided families have money left in their allowances. However, we don't recommend a transcript evaluation for every single transition. Typically, those come into play when families have a difference of opinion in terms of what their children have accomplished and the credits they've accrued, as opposed to what the receiving school is saying. So that helps give like an outside, unbiased look at what they think that the students have, and parents can use that to negotiate with the schools to ensure that their children are placed appropriately. Another thing that we talk about is ensuring that your children, if they're planning to go to college or any post-secondary education institution, make sure they know whether or not they need to take the SAT or ACT. And NDSP students are actually eligible to take the SAT and ACT at the nearest DoDEA location if there's no other testing center available through in their location where they're currently located. And so they would just contact their regional education specialist, and we would facilitate the process of getting them approved and set up. And parents are actually responsible for the fees for those exams. However, NDSP does offset the cost between what the test would cost in the US and the international testing fee. So we will take care of that, provided that they have money in their education allowance. Again, we are not responsible for college application fees, but families are or should pay attention to college application deadlines, FAFSA deadlines, those types of things. And then also maintain maybe a file or something where they have copies of their children's transcripts, any grade reports, anything related to their academic journey. And we call that, of course, academic tracking and college planning. And NDSP actually offers School Links, which is our premier college and career readiness resource, and it's available to all of our students in grades 6 through 12. But there's also a portion for parents where they can help their students with tracking everything and keeping everything in one place, so it is a little easier. I think that we had a question. Is it something that can wait until the end, or would you like, is it specific to transition support?
It is specific to transition support.
Okay.
I'm looking on the NDSP website right now, and it says that the NDSP students are eligible to take the the SAT at DoDEA school locations. Does that mean that our children can't take these exams at these international schools?
Oh, yes, they can take them anywhere. That's just an additional, location that they can. Some parents actually want their children to go to the DoDEA location. So we were just letting families know that that is an option as well. It just takes a little more coordination, but I think it's easier if it's offered at the international school they attend or a nearby international school.
I understand. Thank you.
You're more than welcome. Okay, I'm going to turn this back over to talk about the educational allowance and support.
Thank you, Shanna. Thank you, Dr. Smalls. And I appreciate that question that you asked. I guess that gives us a little bit of feedback on maybe making that more clear on our website. But you guys would have a long way to travel to get to a DoDEA school if that were the requirement. So good news on that. I'll just breeze a little bit over the education allowance, and I'm breezing over it just because I want to make sure you all have time, but I do want to underscore the importance of your understanding of the education allowance. We're going to talk a little bit about where to find it, and also I'll transition over to Lori to talk more about how the allowance is applied when you're looking at an actual school invoice. So just to give you some big picture items that really do matter. The education allowance, first of all, it is published on the Department of State website. It's established by the Department of State. Many of you are probably a part of that process and a part of the survey. And if you're not, then do know that there is a survey, an educational survey that is done annually. In locations where there isn't a consulate or embassy, which most of you are in those locations that do have, then we are involved in working with the State Department to get an education allowance established. But it really is important to know, and this is sometimes not 100% clear to families, that the allowance is established based upon what is otherwise known as the base school. And I say it in quotes because for DoD folks, when people hear base, they think installation and they think DoDEA school sometime. We're talking about the school that Department of State has established to determine what the allowance, and in most of your locations that will also be the same as the assisted school. And so the allowance is established based upon that particular school, the reason this is important is because while we said earlier that families do have choice, and they do, of course, the caveat is going to be, you know, we can pay what's allowable, not allowable. We'll talk a little bit more about that shortly, but only up to what that maximum amount is. We're seeing a growing trend around the world where other schools in that location may have a faster, you know, they may be increasing their fees at a faster rate, or a higher rate, I should say, than potentially what the base school. And so families are like, why isn't the allowance going up? Well, it is, you know, adjusting, but it's adjusting according to whatever that base school is. And so that's something really important for you to know, particularly as you're helping families with their decision making. Again, it's not to just deter them from choosing a different school. It's just for them to understand that that first year, it could be the school that they select may be within the allowance, but in future years, that might not be the case because that's not the school that is being used as the point of reference. Another thing that's important, as you well know, is that the allowance is based upon the sponsor's assignment location, with very few exceptions. We do have a couple of kind of far-flung places that we may use a different city location or different site, but generally it's based upon the sponsor's assignment location and the child's grade level, because it might be different. And we'll take a look at an example shortly for Bogota. The home study and virtual school has its own allowance. For K-6, it's $10,500, and for 7 through 12, it's $21,500. There are a few caveats to that. And again, that is not an entitlement, or like, you know, it's not a guaranteed amount. That's the absolute maximum. There are some things that we cannot cover. We're going to talk more about that in just a moment. And for home study, we're not going to get into the nuances of home study because that's its own briefing, for being honest. But it does have its own set of policy guidelines around what we can and cannot reimburse. So locating the allowance, again, we're talking about, you know, what is the allowance? How is it established? We're going to talk about some policy matters as it relates to the allowance. But if you're interested in finding your particular location, it is on the Department of State allowances site. There's a couple of ways you can search for it. You can either do it by post location. You can also do it by country, and then a list of all the post sites will appear. And then once you are within your post location or country, you'll see that, or if you're in the country location, sorry, then all of the different posts that are available in that particular location, that particular country, excuse me, will show up. And as you can see, and as you probably are familiar, it doesn't just give you the education allowance. There are other allowances that you're able to review as well. And then within the education allowance, this is just an example, you will see by grade level, you will see the at post and the away from post. And as was noted by Dr. O'Brien earlier, wherever the at post and away from post allowance is the same number, that would suggest to you that the Department of State has determined that that school is considered adequate. And I put adequate in quotes because adequate has a specific meaning to the Department of State. Kevin gave a couple of examples earlier in terms of some of those things that assisted schools do, but adequacy has to do with their policy regulations and guidelines. It can't be a school that has a religious affiliation. It cannot be it has to be a nonprofit. There's a couple of other criteria. I'm saying that because while it is important to note if a school is adequate or not in the eyes of the Department of State, it doesn't mean that the school is not a good school. And sometimes that word adequacy can kind of throw people off a little bit. But it is just for you as a liaison to be clear where there is a higher allowance available for boarding. That's what's probably most important for you to know. Although even if the at post and away from post allowance is the same, a family could still choose to board their child. They're just not going to have any additional funding above whatever's there in the allowance. Whereas if there is a higher away from post allowance, as is noted here for the upper grades, they would have a higher allowance available to them if they were to choose to board their child. So we talked about the allowance, that's the money, but attached to that is something really important to also understand. which is what are those examples of allowable and non-allowable fees? Because as you already have been told, and as you'll hear more, and as you probably are very familiar with, even though there's a dollar amount, there are some things that we simply can't pay for. And so just these are examples, but a general rule of thumb to consider when you're thinking about allowable fees is what would otherwise be available at no cost to the student if they were in a U.S. public school. We are very well aware that they're not attending a U.S. public school, but that is the baseline and the kind of the fiscal rule of thumb that we're thinking about. Is it a personal expense? Is it something that they would have otherwise had for free if they were attending a DoDEA school or a U.S. public school? Generally speaking, we're able to fund the tuition, transportation, and required fees, but we got to be careful because some schools, their businesses, as we know, they might include and, kind of do bucket lots of things into the tuition cost, including things that we may not be able to pay. So we'll get more into that shortly. But in general, we can pay for textbooks, technology rentals, but not purchases. Again, that becomes something that the student owns. And in a U.S. public school, students aren't usually given a laptop to keep forever, right? They're given it to as a loaner. And so we are able to fund those types of expenses. Course ending exam fees. And as I mentioned, home study has a separate list, and we can do a separate presentation altogether about home study because there are some different rules given the fact that the family will ultimately own those materials at the end of the child's time with us. Okay, so examples of non-allowable fees would be meals, uniforms come up quite a bit, overnight excursions and trips, even though we have worked a small solution that requires the parent and the school to disclose a bit more information. If we find out that there's a curricular cost associated with the particular trip, then we may, under certain circumstances, be able to pay those portion of the fees, but not any of the other personal fees like lodging and things like that. As was mentioned earlier about college entrance exam fees, we cannot pay for the exam fee, but we can pay for the international portion of that fee. We cannot pay for computers or laptops in terms of what would be owned. And aftercare and after school activities are also non-allowable. And so I will transition over to Lori Edom to share more with you about all of that was policy. Sounds good, but no kidding. What does that mean when it comes to actually paying the bills and what a parent would be responsible for? With that, Lori, over to you.
Thanks, Erica. So where policy meets finance. So as mentioned earlier, the education allowance is designed to assist in defraying the cost to obtain educational services ordinarily provided free or without charge by a public school in the United States. One-time fees are normally paid outside of the allowance, and here's an example of allowable and non-allowable fees in this quadrant chart. Allowable fees include the tuition, transportation, and registration enrollment fees, while non-allowable expenses may include meals, overnight field trips, even if they're connected to curriculum or sports teams. Uniforms, technology, laptops, as Erica said, we can pay for rentals, but not for purchases. And if the student keeps the laptop or the iPad at the end of the year, so it's critical that we know it's not a lease to own. Of course, if the device is returned to the school at the end of the year, then it is allowable. So some key things to know and do in submitting invoices. The financial analyst role is very important, and the financial analyst is Kelly Lanier for your locations. The financial analyst role is very important when processing payments on behalf of your child. Some actions include coordinating with the liaison, collecting annual fee schedules and calendars from the schools, and analyzing invoices for the allowable fees and applicability to the DSSR 270. And also providing payment confirmation as per the funding detail sheet to the parents, providers, schools, and liaisons. While management determines the eligibility of each child, the entitlement letters are the documents that support the obligation of funds for the children from the local embassy FMO, the Financial Management Office. T-22 students whose sponsors are supported through a foreign military sales or security assistance office will provide their invoices to the local embassy financial management office, or FMO, for processing, while O&M, operation and maintenance sponsors, will submit directly to the NDSP team for processing payments. We prefer the O&M sponsors to use the NDSP sponsor portal so they can track their payments and DSSR balances. The process for the O&M sponsors, and of course, this is the NDSP process, a T-22 FMO process may vary, but I'm giving you our processes in this brief. So the process for the O&M sponsors include requesting annual tuition invoices and monthly, quarterly, or semester transportation invoices, submitting to the NDSP for processing. The education allowance begins when both the sponsor and the student are in country. So once in country, the sponsors will submit any out-of-pocket allowable cost to us for reimbursement. Remember, signatures are a critical element of auditability for us. So payments made directly to the sponsor must include the sponsor claim for reimbursement form, an invoice, and proof of payment. The reimbursement will be made directly to the sponsor's bank account on file with the NDSP. It's important to note that the school contract is an agreement between the school and the sponsor. We cannot legally enter into contract on behalf of parents with a foreign entity. So payments made directly to a vendor must include the provider reimbursement for services rendered form and an invoice. The payment will be made directly to the provider's bank account on file with the NDSP. Again, signatures on the claim form are required by both the provider confirming the services were rendered and by the parent confirming stated services were received. So refund policy for NDSP. Sometimes credits and refunds are required, though no fault of our parents. Credits may be applied to the next year's invoice, but it must be for the same returning student at the same school. Credits cannot be shared or reapplied among multiple students due to the specific DSSR allowance per student. Credits must be reflected on the updated invoice for auditability. Refunds are applied when the student is not returning, such as PCSing student or a graduating senior. If the future enrollment status is not known at the time offered, then the refund option must be utilized. So the NDSP provides a 24/7 service for parents to be able to track their child's DSSR allowance, transactions, and balances. Parents can register annually for the program and update their contact information. They can also view their current school, assigned grade, meaning 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, not A, B, C, D, and also load extension DROS documents. O&M sponsors can also update their banking information as well as upload their educational claims and or invoices via the portal for a safe and convenient way to submit for the reimbursement. The NDSP also provides a liaison portal for liaisons who are assigned locally and coordinate on behalf of their families. They can view sponsors who are within their area of responsibility for prior years, current years, and future year registrations. Liaisons do have the ability to upload invoices and or extensions on behalf of their sponsors as needed. It's important to note and to notify the NDSP with the incoming liaison upon your departure. Providing a continuity folder for the new liaison helps them to understand the specifics and historical aspects of the program. So I've taken a quick snapshot of the liaison portal and I've highlighted the important links for you. Please note the new user login link to utilize when you first get access to the system. This email matches the email that you entered when applying for the program. Right below that is a password reset if ever needed. And finally, please note the highlighted training link at the bottom. This link takes you to a training video on how to use the application. Of course, the liaison can always reach out to the NDSP for assistance with any questions. And with that, I'll send it back to Erica.
Thanks, Lori. So we've fire hosed you with lots of information, and now we want to share just a couple of other notes, and then also get some feedback from you all. In our experience, we kind of know, what's worked and maybe some things that haven't worked so well. So I thought it'd be a nice opportunity for Kevin to also share from his lens too, things that have worked and some good practices that he's seen in working with you all and working with other liaisons. And also just a thing to note, we've shared a lot of information with you. And one thing that often comes up from our liaisons is wondering kind of who's on first for what, where do we go to for what? And we thought, just as a way to share, while we are not, able to say what your role is, we understand that you have wide-reaching roles that are beyond what we're talking about today. Some areas that we do see ourselves collaborating well, as listed, kind of where the circles overlap. Some things that we have specific responsibility for are related to eligibility, things related to finance and invoices. Obviously, we're connecting with you if there's questions, but we really would suggest having sponsors just contact us directly when it comes to eligibility matters. And it gets really, really interesting when it comes to extension orders and people retiring. And we really hate to put you all in a situation where you're trying to make decisions that may not be as easy to determine. And then a few other things on top of kind of the blue circles are areas that we see ourselves having kind of primary responsibility, and where we overlap with you is really being able to collaborate to get more information as it relates to boots on the ground context. So if there's an exception to policy, a question that comes up about what's happening, we oftentimes will reach out to you all to give us some support with that. Or maybe it is something related to the school and invoicing matters, and Lori and Kelly are reaching out to try to get more information to get some assistance on what a school is billing us for and how we might be able to mitigate that. With that said, I'll pass it over to Kevin to talk a little bit more about this and how he's been able to collaborate with you all, and also get some input from you about ways that may be impactful.
Great, thanks so much. We have really fire hosed you guys with a lot of information, and just know that we're here to help support in any of these questions. Some of the impactful practices, as they may be called, that really can be beneficial for you there in location. Maintaining a good welcome packet. Oftentimes you all are sitting at embassies or consulates, but we have DoD members who are not sitting at an embassy or a consulate. So they may be told to reach out to the CLO, for example, for a list of schools. And I'll use Argentina for an example, because I know Gloria keeps a fantastic welcome packet. They may reach out to the CLO and say, what schools are available in Mendoza or in Bahia Blanca? Well, the CLO doesn't maintain anything for that, but she maintains a welcome packet for all of the DoD families going to Argentina, and it includes schools in those locations. So if you don't have a welcome packet, that's a good place to start. Certainly we can help you get one established, especially if you have locations away from the embassy that or the consulate that the chief of mission doesn't have any input for. Knowing when and who to contact is just really important. Think about, you can always contact me or Kelly, the management team. Sometimes it's always, sometimes it's best to err on the side of caution. And if somebody's asking you particularly, say, about special education, and you say, I don't know, but Kevin knows about that, and let me give you his email address. And so if they're asking about allowable or non-allowable expenses, then again, make sure that you have a good understanding of them, but at the same time know when and who to contact. And within this slide deck that we can share with you all has all that contact information. Just to have a good understanding of the education allowance and what's allowable and not allowable. We get asked at least once a week, will we buy computers? Well, we can't buy computers, but we can lease computers as long as they go back to the school, or rent computers as long as they go back to the school or that agency. Knowing about specifically, like think about Mexico City, and you have ASF as the assisted school, but you have Green Gates and Humanitree are both greater in cost than the assisted school, than ASF. So knowing your specific location, if there are schools that are outside of that, and if a parent comes and says, hey, I'm thinking about enrolling in this school, you can tell them right up front, hey, just be advised that you're going to be out of pocket for that. In addition, and we always talk about this kind of walking the fine line, we are points of contact. We're education specialists. You are our liaisons, you're boots on the ground experts. You understand this. Hopefully you get out and visit schools and can assist with doing site visits when we come to town. But sometimes it's just really important that we are able to be objective when we give an advice. Even though personally you may have had a challenge with the school, or you think a certain school is a certain way or may have a certain culture, you can give them data about the school and say, well, 50% of our students attend this school and only 1 or 2 attend that school. But it's just really important to maintain that objectivity and not try to persuade somebody one way or another due to a personal experience or an issue that you may have had with them. So again, it's just really important for us to be good points of contact, know who to reach out to and know when to reach out to them, and just have a good understanding about our specific locations and have that welcome packet in place for when necessary. So just real quick, where to find more information. We're going to open up to questions. Our website has been updated fantastically. Thank you, Dr. Smalls. She led a team that updated our website, and it is full of information. Everything that we talked about today is on our website, from procedures to payments, supports and resources, frequently asked questions, contact information, how to register, how and when to re-register, pre-K, everything about that we talk about here today is available on our website, and I would encourage you to become familiar with that. Again, here's our contact information, education support. This one is me. Our eligibility and program support, that's our management team, and they will be the ones that, when you talk about eligibility and any kind of program support. Also, we have a home study support email for families that just specifically have home study questions. You can send them to that. And then, of course, we have Kelly at our invoice box. And so, again, this is a good way to reach out to us and get to the right person, and that's a really important role for you guys to help facilitate. So I did want to open it up to questions, and I would ask you to just go ahead and either raise your hand or just turn off your mic and ask any questions. We do appreciate your questions. We appreciate your feedback. It doesn't even have to be a question. If you want to come on at this time and say, this is something that was helpful to me and I'd like to see more of this, or this is my specific question for my specific area. We are recording this, so the questions, we'll read them, and then they'll become part of that transcript for future liaisons as well.
Good morning. My name is Christine. I do not have a question, but I just appreciate the point about being objective on providing information to incoming families. I just reached out to Buenos Aires to see if I can get that welcome packet so I can start something from Mexico City. I think that being objective on what is the percentage of personnel or students attending the different schools, especially here in Mexico, is going to help our families make a more informative decision. So thank you.
Absolutely. I saw another hand up there.
Yeah, I think I see Ricardo had hand up, and then Miguel. And I'm just reading the names from the chat, so I'm sorry if you go by something different.
No worries. I go by Ricardo. Team, first and foremost, thank you very much for offering this this training. It was very beneficial. How often do you offer this?
That's a really good question, and this is the first one that we've offered in a while, but we are going to plan to offer these more frequently. We put one in the last, what we consider, quarter of this school year. And we plan to expand this in a global perspective as well. But as a regional education specialist, I do want to do these more frequently. Considered some other options too to help us communicate more often. And as we roll into the Northern Hemisphere fall schedule, expect to hear from us and look for more opportunities for us to get together.
Kevin, I just wanted to mention that this will be posted to the website. So if you know of anyone or who wants to view it, they can. Or if you're in this session and you just wanted to review what we spoke about, you can do that as well. It should be posted within the next week, but at the latest 2 weeks.
Thank you, Dr. Smalls.
I see Miguel.
Hey, good morning, team. Miguel Arroliga from Embassy Managua. So good morning here, maybe afternoon where you are. One, I just wanted to say thank you for putting this on. I've been part of the program for 18 months, and this is the first time that I can kind of get some concrete knowledge from SMEs that have been doing this way longer than I have. Please continue this, and I look forward for it to just keep developing. I did have a question though on the special programs and needs. 3 and up was kind of like the age. My question was, how long is that process to get someone or a student with some type of a speech impediment or because depending on how long they're going to be at post, whether it be a 12-month, 18-month, is it worth it? But I just kind of wanted to see if somebody could give me like a time reference on how to get them tested, et cetera, et cetera. Over.
Yeah, great question, Copy. So we will get them done as quickly as the parents can return information to us. Particularly for speech, we can have an assessment done online or there locally if we have a SLP local. We can do them, within a couple of months. I would encourage people to reach out to me if they have concerns about that, because it's so important to capture the information that's occurring in location today, because what happens if they move to a new location in 6 months and we haven't captured where they are now, they have to start all over again when they get to their next duty site. So it's really important that if there are any concerns about educational development with speech or language or learning or social emotional, that go ahead and reach out to me. And there are ways that I can, if it's a learning concern, for example, I can send you an authorization for a Let's Go Learn online diagnostic exam, and you could do it that night, and that would give us information to go on straight away. And just to clarify that 3-year-old and 4-year-old question, and I'm so glad you caught that, because when I said it, I thought, oh, that's going to be confusing. So to be eligible for special education starts at age 3 in NDSP. To be eligible for special education, period, starts at birth. Now, age 3, I will connect you with the Educational Development Intervention Services that's either going to be in Puerto Rico or North Dakota or in DC at Walter Reed. They are going to manage your case from birth to 3, and then at 2 years, 6 months, so 6 months before they turn 3, they're going to start turning them over to me. And then as soon as they turn 3, I'll already have them on an individualized education plan, and we'll be able to start school for them to meet their special education needs. Starting at age 4 for pre-K, all students are eligible for NDSP support. So from birth to 3, it goes to what we call EDIS, Educational Development Intervention Services. Starting at 3, it becomes NDSP for special education only. And then starting at age 4, when they enroll in an eligible school, everybody's eligible for NDSP. I see Gloria has her hand up. I think you're on mute if you're talking.
Hello, now can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you now.
Okay. No, just to say that if anybody else besides Mr. Rufino wants the welcome packet, actually, I have two parts. One that I made it for the newcomers, and the other one was actually written by Dr. O'Brien, who came last year to Argentina. So we worked together, and that might help also. I can send it as an example to the other coordinators and POCs.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And again, that's something that we can work together on. Site visits are a part of my annual duties, and I do try to get to as many sites as I can, particularly when there's a need, but also just as an overview of being able to see what those sites were like. Being in Argentina was really eye-opening for me and what our families get to experience in terms of when they're specifically not in Buenos Aires. So I was able to work with Gloria and her team to put together a welcome packet specifically for them. And it really is very helpful, and I think it'll last a long time in terms of how schools operate outside of Buenos Aires. And we can do that in any of your sites, certainly with some coordination with me and the help of Gloria by sharing her full welcome packet.
And let me just add, because I know someone mentioned about these type of forums, and so I just to piggyback on that question and then just kind of our future, we really are very interested. So glad you all could join this one. And Kevin, as you mentioned, going into the fall, the more that we're able to have these kind of sessions with you all, the better, because today was really kind of a share everything that we know with you. And what we want it to become is more of an opportunity for us to learn from you as well. So today, it was primarily you hopefully it was helpful. Not much time for you all to ask your questions, but as we progress and have more opportunities like this, we'd love to have more kind of a roundtable approach where we can hear things that you might be going through or specific questions, or maybe even have opportunities to share even real time, welcome packets or other kinds of impactful strategies that will help you all. And certainly it also really honestly benefits us too, because then we can hear more specifically about things that are going on within your particular area. Dr. Shanna Smalls mentioned something we're doing now. We're really trying to learn more about transition issues, not always issues, transition things, right? All things transition. Sometimes we don't know that a family's having any kind of challenges until way after the fact. We find out about it after a conversation where someone says, oh yeah, family X had this issue, and we really didn't know about it. And so while we might not always be able to fix the problem per se, we want to be more aware. So same thing with you all. If you are tracking any kind of issues with folks transitioning into your locations, or as they're transitioning out and they're coming back to you with questions, maybe something that came up at their inbound public school in the US, we really want to hear from you about that, even though we may not have a lot of time today. Certainly, if there's anything like that, you can funnel it directly to us or, through our management team or through Kevin. We really would love to hear some of those real life stories so that we can also try our best to offer and vary our support so that we're not always in reactive mode, which right now, unfortunately, we're a little bit in reactive mode, although we have some great supports out there. Not every family knows about them. So just wanted to kind of make that a point as well for just little future forecasting. And certainly if you have any ideas of things that you would want these sessions to be to better help you in your role, we certainly want to hear about that as well.
Great. With no more questions, I know we've gone well over an hour, and we had some folks with some new meetings coming up after this, and really just can't thank you guys enough for your time and the feedback. I see many of you have written in the chat asking Gloria for a copy of the welcome packet. We look forward to working with you. We're here. We'll answer your questions. Plan to have more of these going into the fall. And we really appreciate your time today. Thanks for joining, and you all have a great day and a great weekend.